Welcome back to the 80s at the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Jake Wilker is with us from Car Wars. This is the ultimate guide to mastering outbound sales calls. Jake, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Excited to be here again, Ted.
Jake, excited to have you. I have met a number of your colleagues from Car Wars. Very impressed with some segments that we did on the Evening After Dark show with the Nilo Company. And congratulations to you, my friend, on all the success you and Car Wars are having in the industry.
Yeah, it's always fun getting to chat with you, but I like having our other team members meet you as well.
Well, it was great to meet them and look forward to a lot more. And I understand you got a lot of great material for us today, Jake, especially on the outbound sales calls, which is a huge part of what I know BGCs want to do and dealerships want to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for the latest and greatest.
Awesome. Well, yeah, today what I want to chat with you about, Ted, is the importance of the outbound calls. And I feel like we've locked in on the sales side of things for years on that, but the neglected side has been service for outbound calling, outbound texting, really the blanket guide of following up with your customers when you said you were going to, and when you need to. So that's what I want to cover today is some tips. It's a simple little breakdown on why we should talk about outbound calling in service and what we can do to get better at it. So that's what I want to dive in with you on.
I'm looking forward to it. And as I said, we all know it's such a greatly needed area, to work on. And I'm very, very grateful that you're here today to talk to us about it some more.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing we could start with is, why do you need to make outbound calls? And I always laugh about this one because if you think about a world where you never need to follow up with someone, that would be just awesome. I mean, Ted, think of how many times you get a call and you're like, oh gosh, I need to do this, or oh, I need to follow up, or maybe I'll buy something because someone called me. I think that's such a big piece in receiving calls. So making those outbound calls from business and texting. I get a text from a different company every day, reminding me of some sort of appointment. I have my lawn guy coming later today. He gave me a heads up. Those follow-ups and proactive outreach go a really long way to improve not only the customer satisfaction, but show rates and overall booking rates.
Yeah, I love it. And in all of what we do, like you just described, it makes our life easier, and it ends up saving time that it takes a little more time to be able to do it and maybe to force ourselves, but the results are, long lasting and worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate example I always think of when I think of service outbound calling is when you're proactive, your CSI scores go up because that customer is no longer having to wonder what's happening with their vehicle. So if you have a texting platform that is proactively letting the customer know what status their vehicle's in, or if you're calling, either one works. That stops them from having to call in and get upset that they're having to reach out. But the opposite also side is it also clogs up your phone lines on the inbound side. So your connect rate goes down. So the importance of outreach and being proactive is really what I want to focus on today because it is vital.
Excellent.
And on the second piece here, everyone should be making outbound calls, right? We have the service advisors following up. We have the BDC, which I am a huge proponent of, is service BDCs. I feel like that's something that's slowly catching on. I feel like sales BDCs have been a big success over the years. And every time I go in and work with one of our groups that has a sales only BDC, they're going, hey, please use your data, Jake. Go in, show them our crisp metrics and service, and convince them that we can take the outbound calls for service too. And that's been a big trend as well. But I think then also the managers need to be on the phone following up with the customers after the service is completed.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Love it.
Yeah. And on the third one, this is where I really want to dig in. What are some strategies to handle objections on outbound calls? So, I mean, Ted, if I cold called you right now, first off, would you answer?
Maybe.
Yeah. I guess the key is what shows up on your caller ID
Right.
on your
Exactly.
phone, right?
Yeah.
So I screen so hard. I'm in sales. I try and be respectful to anyone that calls me. So if it's an unknown number, I'm probably answering. But one thing that does pop up like crazy right now, and the number one objection is if you're not careful and you're calling and making a lot of outbound calls, this phone will now show spam caller or
Um,
spam or unknown caller. But that spam one, once that pops up, or scam, when that pops up for you, I'm not picking up that phone call. I don't
no,
know a single person that would.
no,
So I
no.
think the first thing you need to do is make sure when you're making those outbound calls, know where you're calling from. Because if you don't have those lines registered with the carriers, what will end up happening is that line will get marked as spam. And
Wow.
luckily, when you're working with a call tracking company like us, or really anyone, you're able to have different tracking lines. And those tracking lines can, old school way, be replaced. So you can replace it with a new number that won't show as spam. However, what we found over the years is what ends up happening, you have to replace those numbers frequently if you're making a lot of outbound calls. And AT&T's gotten really smart, for example, at marking them quickly if there's a bunch of calls coming from one number. But with us at Car Wars now, you can do carrier registration. So when you get set up, we're going to go ahead and register all of your outbound lines. We'll give individual numbers for agents so that, the service advisor doesn't say, I like making calls from my phone because people know my cell phone number. We'll give them a designated line, and now it'll never show as spam. So I think that's a huge thing that doesn't get talked about as enough.
And Jake, I have heard that. I've actually heard that now from dealers in service, about the, multiple calls becoming a spam call. So good information. So you're able to.
I'm not kidding. Look, right now, call coming in. What's that say?
That's me. No.
That's hilarious. It literally shows spam risk right as we were talking about
Yeah, he's the person who calls me the most. Spam risk.
it. Exactly. So yeah, exactly. So you said you've been hearing a lot about it
Yeah.
in service today. Yeah, and I think that's the first hurdle once you start diving in on the phones. Now, the big risk, and this is what I really want to make as a warning. If you're making your outbound calls and you don't have a call tracking company or a designated phone line for it, sometimes when you're making outbound calls from your main line, and this can happen at some dealerships, if that gets marked as spam,
Ooh.
you're in a lot of trouble. I mean, that's your main phone line. So you need to be really careful about that. So when you're making outbound calls, just check that you're doing it with a tracking line that's easily replaced, or your phone system has designated lines for it.
All right. Super. Good to know. That's the best practice right there. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, okay, now I've connected with Ted. Ted picked up the phone, and my ask right now is to do additional services on your vehicle. Right, Ted? What would you say if I was calling after I showed up? You dropped your car off. We took a peek at it, and I found some additional services that could be done.
Well, there's the element of time, okay? Because you'd have to take the time to explain that to me now, right?
Yeah.
And of course, seeing is believing, right? So I'd probably want to know a little bit more.
Exactly. So that's where you have a call, but you need to email, text, whatever your partner is,
Yep.
what needs to be done and why. And
Yep.
so just a phone call isn't going to do the service,
No.
but it does work as the anchor. So one of my best practices is text that over, send a photo, whatever your tools you have to be able to do that. Every media availability, use them all. And then the call is where you're kind of making that final close, right? So you've sent this
Yes.
over. I want to get this done because I can talk about it in the most meaningful way with the customer. So really using all sources helps together really well.
And Jake, like if you and I right now, if the dealer was trying to contact me, okay, if my car was in service, I can't pick up the phone call. But if they were to send me a text with even a video, okay, and I'm in a meeting somewhere or you're in a meeting somewhere, we could look at that and you could approve it and do the whole thing without having to make the phone call. And then you're right, save the phone call for something as a follow-up, maybe something that I did not approve or maybe something I should be aware of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And then the third one is going to be when you're making those outbound calls because someone's frustrated. So you just got an alert from Car Wars that said a call was a frustrated caller alert, essentially. So a call came in, the customer was really upset because they've called 7 times and they haven't been able to get to your service advisor. I think these are probably the hottest calls, these heat calls for service managers to follow up with. So all you'd have to do is when you get that alert, you can push the button in our platform and it'll call the customer right there for you. And what we want to do from there is try and calm them down. And so that the important part there is fall on the sword, and own your mistakes, and then speak about what you're going to do moving forward. And I think that's a really big step that goes a long way rather than, hey, I'm just calling because I heard you're upset. Be ready and be informed about their situation. So I personally looked into it. I saw Bob was off today. I'll have Bob follow up with you. But in the meantime, I took care of XYZ for you.
Smart. I love it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of strategies on outbound calls. This is an area I love chatting about for service, especially. I think it's just such a fun area to talk about. So if you do at the end, there's going to be some action items that call to actions here where you can click on the link or give me an email at the bottom. I think you can see it right now, but I'd love to chat further about any strategies or hiccups you're running into on your outbound calls. But another thing that comes up is how many outbound calls should be your team making. And I think that really depends. And that's going to come down to how full your service bay is, as well as what is sitting in front of the tasks list for that service advisor. So if he has 50 tasks that he needs to complete by the end of the day, this isn't a trick question. Ted, how many calls should that service advisor make?
As many as possible.
Yeah. Let's get through all 50. Make those 50 calls because they're there, right? Yeah. And so we want to complete our tasks. And one thing we don't want to be doing, and this is where having an accountability tool goes a really long way, we want to make sure that that service advisor is actually completing those tasks. So if you have a way to measure that with using click to call in your system, or whether your phone system's measuring, however you're measuring those phone calls, it's a best practice to make sure you're not only completing the number of calls that you've set at your dealership, but also with the feedback loop, finding out, did those calls get made, as well as picking out a few for coaching opportunities, because that's the best way you're going to improve is, hey, here's 3 live calls you did today. Before you check out, let's take a peek at these and see if we could have done anything better.
That's one of the things I like about Car Wars. In fact, Tully at Nilo was saying that use these as coaching opportunities, not to talk somebody down, but rather to bring them up. So I love the way you and Car Wars approach this, Jake.
Exactly. I think a lot of focus gets put on poorly handled opportunities. And I guess rightfully so. Those are the ones we want to call ourselves as managers and try and save those. But I think there's also the other side where when it's so easy for us, when you're making those 50 outbound calls and we tell you, here's the 8 live conversations, you're not having to filter through all 50 of those outbound dials to find good ones. Here's just the 8. So take the time to find the one where he nailed it. You know, that rep really did good. And you can play that back for him and give that positive reinforcement.
Love it.
And the last one, when are best times of days to effectively make outbound calls?
I love this one, by the way. I want to know, when is the best time? Because I have my own opinion, but go ahead.
So we do an annual sort of data study of all of our Car Wars customers. And so year over year, and I've done it for 3 years in a row now. We just finished a separate webinar on for automotive news actually on this, where we talk specifically about the data study. But one thing we always measure every year is, when is the best time to reach out to our customers? And the crazy thing is, it never has changed. Before COVID, since 2019, post COVID, it's 11 to 2 o'clock. There's a slot 11 to 2 o'clock. And typically it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So people are at work, at their desk, they've had their cup of coffee, and they're probably slightly bored at the moment, and they're willing to pick up that phone call and do something besides the work they've been doing for the last 3 hours. And that's maintained the same thing. On the reverse side, they're also going to probably call you around those same hours. So the worst thing you can do is have no one staffed up to answer these calls. So one thing that happens, you make all these outbound calls. With my phone, right? It's really easy to say, I'll call you right back. or just push that one button on the iPhone, right? That sends that text back. Well, what you want to do is make sure you have someone willing to respond back to that, whether it's a text or a call. They're going to call you back quickly. So you don't want to make a bunch of calls and then go off for lunch. So you need to stagger and make sure you're willing to answer phones to help each other out.
I love it. Great points, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I've also heard post work, 5, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. But
Mhm.
what I find is, yeah, they've actually left for the day. They're
Might
checked
be too
out.
late. Yeah,
They're done. You missed your window.
too
Exactly.
late.
They're probably showing up at that time. Ideally, to the dealership is the best time.
Well, to go back and reference our friend Tully, he talks about same day selling. You got to sell the hours you've got today. You can't sell yesterday's hours. So you've got to sell it now while it's in the shop. So I agree with you. We got to do it earlier in the day. Yep.
That's a great point. I really like that saying. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
Tully's great.
Same day
Um,
selling.
So no, I think if we focus in on these 5 areas, and you know why you're making your calls, everyone's making the calls. You're ready and able to handle the calls. I think one thing with my team, I run into another objection is I'll hear I run a sales team, and so they're making outbound calls all day, and when a call's handled poorly, they'll go, "Well, I wasn't expecting them to answer." So I think the last nugget on that one is always be prepared to speak with who you're calling. So have the data ready and don't just be going through the motions. Be active in when you're making your outreach. And then we want to complete all of our tasks for the given day, whether that's 15 or 50. And then we also want to make sure we're utilizing our time well. So if you're busy during the day, time block, set aside an hour from 11 to 12 or 12 to 1 so that you have your highest chance of converting and speaking with customers.
I love it. Strong stuff.
So yeah, this is obviously fun for me to talk about. I could talk with Ted about this all day, but please scan our QR code. I'm sure this is one of many you're going to see today, but this one you'll get a prize if you take a demo from us. We have a lot of different ones, and the details are in the QR code. We also have a number up here. Please call. We're happy to chat, as well as my email's been scrolling at the bottom, jake@carwars.com, and I'm happy to speak with you myself.
I love it. Everybody, if you do, take your phone out, open the camera, scan the QR code. It's even got my name I see on there, Ted Ings promo on the QR code. So I like that, Jake. And again, questions to Car Wars, direct them to Jake. There's a number scrolling on the screen as well, or you can go right here with your phone to the QR code and go right to the site right now. So Jake, great information, very relevant, very timely, and on point as usual for the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Absolutely, Ted. Happy to see you the rest of the day.
All right, everybody. Any questions, reach out to Jake Wilker, the ultimate guide to mastering outbound sales calls. Jake Wilker from Car Wars here today, back at the 80s at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
See you, Ted.